Good evening and welcome to the 28th Businessman of the Year Awards ceremony. On behalf of Business India, I'd like to introduce someone whom we requested to conduct this evening's proceedings. She is probably known to some of you as a fundraiser for special causes, one of them being the Sadhana School. She's also known as a creative writer, and some others as a friend. Business India is pleased to invite on stage Geeta Gopalakrishnan, a non-compare compare. We are also happy to donate her honorarium to the TMC Cancer Hospital, Kolkata, which she is involved with, a hospital which will soon be a beacon of hope to cancer patients in Eastern India. Ladies and gentlemen, Geeta Gopalakrishnan.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Business India, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Businessman of the Year 2009 award ceremony. A warm welcome to the Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Special guests from the Ministry of State for External Affairs, Mr. Jacob and Mr. Sanjeev Chakrabarti. It is indeed a pleasure and honor to have you grace this very special occasion. Mr. Aditya Puri, Businessman of the Year 2009, Mrs. Smiley Puri, and members of the Puri family, welcome to the Business India family. Mr. PRS Oberoi, Businessman of the Year 2008, and your family, you are indeed now one of us, and we are delighted to have you here. Several of our past Businessmen of the Year have gathered here. To each of you, a special welcome. Members of the jury who selected the Businessman of the Year 2009, Your Excellencies, the several ambassadors and consul generals whom we are privileged to have in our midst, members of the press, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We are truly pleased to have you with us on this wonderful occasion, a celebration of what is certainly the country's single most coveted recognition for the business community. On my part, I'm honored to be part of this hallmark event. When Ashok Advani conceived of this award 28 years ago, Business India had just begun to make its mark in the corporate world 3.5 years after the magazine launch. If you recall, in that era, business was shrouded in secrecy and profit was a wicked word. Business India saw it differently. It set out with single-minded determination to play the role of a catalyst, to transform mindsets, and to bring to the fore issues, both positive and negative, that had a bearing on business. It also set out to provide a leadership of ideas. In the process, Business India hoped it would bring about a constructive change in the environment so that businesses and the economy could flourish. The rest is history. As a part of this very mission, 28 years ago, Business India set in motion an annual award to commend outstanding performance by a businessman in India, an award to honor and recognize excellence in business, an award that would perhaps be an inspirational role model, an award to honor a person who had not just followed where a path leads, but gone on instead to where there is no path and left a trail. Every year, an eminent panel of distinguished captains of Indian business and industry are involved in choosing Business India's Businessman of the Year. There is recognition, as this is recognized the country's single most illustrious distinction, a recognition that has become so coveted that no other award matches it in stature. Business India's Businessman of the Year includes a galaxy of corporate stars, and each year's selection only enhances that recognition further. It is said that the history of the world is nothing but biographies of great men. Here is a flashback of an incredible roll call of honor. 1982, Ajit N. Haksar, 1983 Rusi Modi, 1984 HP Nanda, 1985 Rahul Bajaj, 1986 Ashok S. Ganguly, 1987 V. Krishnamurthy, 1988 Sumant Mulgaonkar, 1989 Keshav Mahindra, 1990 Aditya V. Birla, 1991 Ratan Tata, 1992 N. Vagul, 1993 Dhirubhai Ambani, 1994 Brij Mohanlal Munjal, 1995 Suresh Krishna, 1996 Deepak Parekh, 1997 we are joint winners Mr. Mukesh Ambani and Anil Ambani, 1998 Parvinder Singh, 1999 N.R. Narayan Murthy, 2000 Azim Premji, 2001 Dr. Anji Reddy, 2002 Sunil Bharti Mittal, 2003 Kumar Mangalam Birla, 2004 S. Ramadurai, 2005 K.V. Kamath, 2006 Baba Kalyani, 2007 Anand Mahindra, 2008 P.R.S. Oberoi. I feel a bit like Shankar Mahadevan after he sang Breathless. And now in 2009, the honor goes to another luminary. Anyone can hold the helm when the sea is calm. But despite the economic turbulence of recent times, as sure as the sun rises in the east every morning, Aditya, whose name means the sun, has shone brightly. Ladies and gentlemen, here is someone who, true to one of HDFC's lines, truly, Sar Uthakar Jia. Aditya Puri unquestionably deserves the Businessman of the Year 2009. For the next 7 minutes, you will see a film which captures some of these sentiments.
He never wears a watch, but is always on time. He never works late in the office, but his dedication to work is 24/7. He built a world-class bank from scratch in 15 years, growing at 30 to 35% per annum, with a net profit of 40% on a compounded basis for 10 years. The 7th largest and one of the most profitable banks in the country. Adopting the latest technology and adding the personal touch. Skillfully negotiating complex mergers and acquisitions. Moving from corporate to retail banking with ease. With an instinct for the right risk-reward equation. So much on his balance sheet as mentor, colleague and family man, which makes Aditya Puri, Managing Director, HDFC Bank, the best banker for our money and the undisputed Businessman of the Year. Aditya Puri, Business India's Businessman of the Year 2009.
As far as I remember, more often than not, it is, business people who are selected as Businessman of the Year. Now here is a banker, a man from my own fraternity, who has been selected as Businessman of the Year. Great! And, I think it's the best possible choice that anybody could have made. During the last year, most of the world was going to seed. Most countries were finding it difficult to grow. There was a recession in many places. India did well. And some or most of the credit for India doing well has been given to the banking industry. In the banking industry, to the public sector banks. And I think that is because, the public sector banks have a large footprint. But I think there were other banks who are doing well. And the bank which takes the cake, definitely HDFC Bank. Definitely Aditya Puri, no doubt about it.
I'm particularly delighted that Aditya is Business India's Businessman of the Year. A year in which you would hardly have expected a banker to be Businessman of the Year.
Starting something from scratch and building the HDFC Bank to one of the best financial institutions in the world is absolutely spectacular.
Aditya has clearly proven that dedication to effort, keeping things simple and building on your strengths delivers results. And these results are there for everyone to see.
Professionally speaking, Aditya always gives you the impression that he's not working hard. He's got a clean desk, he leaves home early. And yet, this is a very, very wrong impression. I think he almost does it sometimes deliberately.
He's one of the most competitive people I know. The way he goes after business, the way he deals with his competition, differentiates himself from that and makes an argument to his clients that they cannot deny. That is what has led him to this success.
The bank has touched the lives of so many people within our own country. And that makes all the difference, because it's not just doing banking for the sake of banking in the corporate sector, but more importantly the reach within the country, which makes it all the more important.
Aditya is a born leader and he leads by example. And my God, what an example he sets.
He's got his strategy and vision, but he's equally an action man. He's very focused. I think that all of it shows in the result in the bank, being a high quality, high growth, highly profitable bank.
He's managed to put together two mergers and bring together two institutions which have had very different cultures, which I think is a phenomenal act.
The part on microfinance and our increased lending to the self-help groups, where he genuinely believes that if a lot of the banks that are into this area and some which are probably not, if they were to replicate a model of lending to SHGs on a sustainable basis, not purely as a social initiative but as a combined social cum commercial objective, then this is something that can really materially impact the weaker sections of society and can actually make a difference.
He has stressed the technology part of the bank from day one. And that is probably one of the reasons that you see success with us.
The stand he takes is always one at the highest level of ethics and integrity, and he gives it to you exactly the way he believes it.
On a daily basis, he gets a report from all these branches and the head of the branches and the branch managers. He has time to read all those reports, review them and make comment on it and send a reply back.
Mr. Puri doesn't wear a watch, but he manages time better than most people I have seen. He has time to meet customers, he has time to go to branches, he has time to discuss issues with senior management, he has time to meet the junior most person in the bank.
There is so much to be done in the banking industry. There is so much work to be done in India, as it is one of the fastest growing economies of the world, that there is enough for every bank. In fact, we could do with more banks and more branches. We both seem to think the same way. So where is the question of, destructive competition? There is so much room to compete and compete collaboratively. That is the way he thinks, and that is the way I think, and that is the way I like, and that is why I like him actually.
He has this very uncanny knack of identifying potential, identifying opportunities, and making sure that these opportunities do not get missed out.
Mr. Puri came along and said, can you set up this bank? So when I looked at it, it was actually a fantastic opportunity, because you had the nationalized banks and you had the foreign banks. The nationalized banks had their distribution and funding capability. The foreign banks had the product and service. So I thought if I could get a bunch of people together who would be able to get the best of the nationalized banks and the best of the foreign banks, then we should be on a surefire winner and create a world-class Indian bank. A lot of people are talking about technology and saying now we have centralized processing and we have core banking. That's base technology. That's base technology 10 years back. Technology from there has to move to what technology can do for you in terms of either extending the geography in terms of where you market your products, reducing cost, changing the way you have your marketing spend and you create your target market, giving you ability to have a better credit appreciation and faster delivery. So a core banking solution is just that you substituted what you were doing manually now by technology. It's not being used to create value. You have to balance the two. You can get over. It's better that you know what you enjoy and then try and be the best in the field, rather than deciding this is what I want to do and try and fit yourself into that. Because then you're not really living life the way you will enjoy it. And life without enjoyment, oh sorry, I mean there must be a lot of hardworking people. I am not one of those. I think you should enjoy life. I like my tandoori chicken, I like my naan, I like the cleanliness of Singapore or whatever, but I'm quite happy with Bombay as well. And I like my friends here, I like the weather. So I wouldn't have wanted to live overseas for a prolonged period of time.
The whole world knows him as a fantastic banker. Yes, he does walk, talk, breathe, banking. But besides that, he's been so good to the children and a fantastic husband to me.
My father is a very strong man. I cannot think of any weaknesses as such, Dad. But his sweet tooth is something that he succumbs to, and he loves his chocolates.
What's his pet name? Among his friends who knew him 35, 40 years ago, his pet name was Pinku Puri.
There are two things that I absolutely envy about you. And the first of that is that you can still afford to leave office at 5:30 p.m. every day. And if I could do the same, I'd be far more popular at home. And secondly, is that even at this level of success and responsibility, you can still operate without a mobile phone. That is absolutely fantastic.
He is a perfectionist, but is totally human.
I can't think of anyone who deserves this accolade more than you. What you have proved to all of us is that you can be a victor at work without being a slave to it.
Aditya Puri, Business India's Businessman of the Year 2009.
I heard a minute ago on the film that Aditya is simple. I can endorse that. One day he called me and simply said, please go to Warden Road and start an account with the bank which is just opened. And I said, I live in Cuff Parade. He said, well, simply do it. He's so simple. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Aditya Puri as Business India's 28th Businessman of the Year. Mr. Puri, welcome to a glittering galaxy of high achievers. May I now request Mr. Ashok Advani, Chairman and Publisher of Business India Publications, and Mrs. Feroza Bilamoria, Managing Director of Business India Publications, to kindly escort to the stage the Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Mr. Aditya Puri, Businessman of the Year 2009, Mr. P.R.S. Oberoi, Businessman of the Year 2008. Hello, sir. May I now request Mr. Ashok Advani, Chairman and Publisher of Business India Publications, to please come up on the podium and address the audience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to see all of you here tonight to celebrate in such large numbers this award for Aditya Puri. But on behalf of Business India, on behalf of Firoza Bilamoria and my other colleagues, I must once again warmly welcome all of you for being with us tonight. The Honourable Minister for External Affairs, Mr. Shashi Tharoor, Mr. Aditya Puri, Businessman of the Year 2009, Mr. Vicky Oberoi, Businessman of the Year 2008, Mrs. Puri, Mr. Deepak Parekh, members of HDFC Bank, several of our past Businessmen of the Year, I saw Ram in earlier from TCS, and their families who've kindly joined us tonight, our special guests, our sponsors Reed & Taylor, Videocon, Jet Airways and Grover Wines, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this award ceremony for the 28th Businessman of the Year. This large gathering is a tribute to the success of Mr. Aditya Puri in building HDFC Bank to its present position of strength. We're also honored to have Mr. Shashi Tharoor as our chief guest. We will soon have the pleasure of having him address us. And we'll understand easily and firsthand why he has been able to carve out a special position for himself as a fresh new mind and a fresh new face in Indian politics. 28 years ago, when we decided to institute an award for business, as Geeta said earlier, profit had an entirely negative image. As votaries for Indian business, we had an uphill task. As a business magazine, we recognized that there were negative sides to business, but at the same time, we strongly believed that business and industry can be the major propelling force for development and growth. Time, I think, has proved us right. We also recognized that business also influences and determines the shape of social development. Quite often, there's a conflict between purely monetary interests and the larger social good. But it was our belief that modern business and industry, properly regulated, can act responsibly towards its employees, its customers, and society as a whole, and yet function extremely profitably. It was our duty to set standards and values, and it is our function to highlight the best that there is in business. It is for these reasons that we decided to institute the Businessman of the Year award. Each year, we have a panel of distinguished businessmen selecting the Businessman of the Year. The tradition is that the previous year's Businessman of the Year chairs the panel, and therefore, in accordance with the tradition, Mr. Oberoi, our Businessman of the Year 2008, chaired the panel for selecting Mr. Aditya Puri as Businessman of the Year 2009. Now, individuals obviously work within the framework of their companies. In the past, as Businessman of the Year, we've had professional managers from the private sector and managers from the public sector. We've also had first-generation entrepreneurs as award winners, and we've also had inheritors who've transformed their businesses. We strongly believed that there is a need to highlight the achievements of a particular individual. We believed that there are individuals of the highest integrity and competence who live by and represent the best traditions and values that there are in business. And we felt that a very useful purpose will be served to hold up such individuals as role models. And this is why we focus on having a single Businessman of the Year. I would say that our selections have been welcomed and accepted by industry and the business community as a whole. And this wide acceptance has vindicated our belief in the need to select a Businessman of the Year. If you remember the roll call that Geeta read out, these Businessmen of the Year have also stood the test of time. In the last few years, it's been fashionable to give a large number of business awards and other awards. And quite honestly, it's quite flattering that people have copied our idea quite widely. But that aside, as I said, we've focused always on the individual, and we've stuck to selecting one person only. I might also boast that our panels have selected awardees almost invariably a few years ahead of the time, and a couple of years later, others follow. Aditya Puri belongs to that rare breed of individuals who have made a significant difference. He's been building the bank HDFC from its very inception 15 years ago. I remember very clearly when Dr. Manmohan Singh, in his earlier avatar, inaugurated the bank at Worli, not far from here. He's been growing at 30% a year, no ordinary feat, year after year for 15 years, and with NPAs of never crossing 1%. This effort has made HDFC Bank the third most valuable bank in the country, although it's the seventh largest. It's the third most valuable with a $15 billion market capitalization. The bank has won accolades from all over, and it serves 18 million delighted customers. Behind this effort has been the team of HDFC led by Mr. Puri. There are other facets of Aditya's personality, some of which we've seen in the film, that are endearing. He has a simple and open approach and readily admits that banking is a simple business as long as one does not get into excesses, either over-leveraging the bank or getting involved into products that do not stand the test of common sense. Behind the simple approach, there's a razor-sharp mind that understands the full complexities of modern money, which understands the pitfalls to be avoided. We have a very large number of bankers and financiers in the audience today, so I'm not sure whether this is appropriate to have a long lecture on banking or finance. And I don't think it's the occasion to get into a long debate as to the quality of governance of the Reserve Bank and the Government of India on the banking sector. But I think most people here would probably agree that with a much freer environment, the banking sector could contribute much more to the industry and economy and the growth of the country. In fact, everyone is clear, I think everyone here is aware, that India has produced some of the best bankers in the world. Even if they don't necessarily perform in India, they don't get a chance to perform in India, they've had a chance to perform all over the world. Whichever bank you go to, the biggest Western banks all have Indians in key positions and even as chief executives. It would not be out of place to mention here that we are also honored to have Deepak Parekh with us, who was our Businessman of the Year in 1996. As chairman of HDFC, the parent that spawned the bank, Deepak has been a great support to Aditya Puri and his team at the bank all these years. I need not say much more about Aditya and his great achievement. All I need to ask you is to join me in welcoming him as Business India's Businessman of the Year 2009. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Advani. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a tradition at Business India. Each year's recipient chairs the panel of jury for the next year's selection. Well, that's the price the businessman pays. He then handles over the mantle to the new awardee that he and his fellow panelists have deemed is the recipient of the award. In fact, Business India is a silent spectator at the judging. Business India merely presents a short list of candidates and a set of criteria, which the jury has the authority to fine-tune as they deem fit. This year's jury comprised, as every year in the past, captains of industry who bring their insights and their vast knowledge to the table. May I also add, except for one or two rare occasions, Business India has never had the same person as a member of the jury in the past 28 years. The list of jury runs into several pages. Don't worry, I'm not going to read that out. But in fact, over time, some of these jury members have themselves become Businessmen of the Year. This year's jury comprised of PRS Oberoi, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, EIH Limited, who chaired the panel, N. Srinivasan, Managing Director, India Cements, Rashesh Shah, Chairman, CEO and Founder, Edelweiss Capital, Harshavardhan Neotia, Chairman, Ambuja Realty, Tarun Kataria, Managing Director, HSBC, N. Chandrasekharan, CEO and Managing Director, TCS, Tejpreet Chopra, President and CEO, GE India, and Mohit Barman, Director, Dabur. Ladies and gentlemen, a special round of applause for the jury, many of whom are in the audience. May I now call upon Mr. PRS Oberoi, Businessman of the Year 2008 and Chairman of the jury, to come to the podium to appraise us on his jury selection process in coming up with the perfect choice of this year's award recipient. Mr. Oberoi requires no introduction to this audience. Last year, when he took over the mantle from Anand Mahindra Businessman of the Year 2007, he held us all captivated with his moving acceptance speech. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Oberoi.
Mr. Shashi Tharoor, Mr. Aditya Puri, Ms. Bilamoria, my friend Ashok, Mr. Deepak Parak, ladies and gentlemen. When my good friend Ashok Advani told me that I had to chair the meeting to choose this year's Businessman of the Year 2009, I said to myself, good heavens, what a responsibility. I'd never chaired a jury meeting before. What if there was a tie? I would have to cast my casting vote. Fortunately, the jury's selection was unanimous. We held the jury meeting at the Belvedere. The meeting lasted a few hours. The jury consisted of eminent persons. Names have already been read out, so I won't repeat them. The discussion was lively. A list of prominent businessmen was presented. Though a very careful process of elimination was, through a very careful process of elimination, 4 persons were shortlisted. The pros and cons of each person were then discussed thoroughly. The list was then reduced to 2. An in-depth discussion followed. Ultimately, after a long discussion, the jury unanimously selected Mr. Aditya Puri as Businessman of the Year. I am very proud to be a member of the jury and chair the jury which selected him. Much has been said about Mr. Puri, and if I am being repetitive, please excuse me. Within a span of 15 years, Mr. Puri has created a world-class bank from scratch. HDFC Bank has been growing consistently and is the 7th largest bank in the country. I did not know that it was the 3rd most valuable bank. Thank you, Mr. Advani. It is also amongst the most profitable banks. It has delivered a consistent 40% growth in net profits on a compounded basis for the past several years, despite the financial crisis which hit the global markets last year. Mr. Deepak Parekh, who is here today with us, had the foresight to select Mr. Puri. At that time, Mr. Puri was CEO of Citibank Malaysia. Mr. Deepak Parekh persuaded Mr. Puri to head the HDFC Bank. Mr. Puri started the bank with a small team who were all veterans in the field. The new bank's aim was to combine advanced technology and products with an extensive reach. Like with every parent-offspring relationship, the bank has inherited one of its most core values. It has conservative credit policies, good customer relationships, and a good reputation based on efficiency, fairness, trust, and most important, transparency. Mr. Puri very humbly attributes the bank's success to his colleagues. It is a team which Mr. Puri has carefully selected and nurtured. Mr. Puri is an epitome of a banker. How many bankers leave their office on time and yet study several hundred reports and send notes back to the branch managers? Mr. Puri has combined his international experience with Indian ethos to build a remarkable bank that is one of the success stories of Indian banking. Mr. Puri heading the bank is testimony to the apex a person can climb to by daring to dream, a dream that has come true. Let us all congratulate Mr. Puri once again for being selected as the Business of the Year 2009. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Oberoi, thank you so much. Every one of us in this audience has undoubtedly had the occasion to experience your world-class hospitality at one or other of your magnificent hotels. As you well know, once a Businessman of the Year, you also become part of the Business India family, a rishta for life. May I now please request Hiral Sheth, one of Business India's dynamic young stars, to present a small memento to Mr. Oberoi as a token of our appreciation. I would like now to call upon Mrs. Feroza Bellamoria, Business India's Managing Director, to introduce our chief guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Distinguished guests on the main table and distinguished guests in the audience. Aditya, this is not only your night. Dr. Tharoor is going to share some of the limelight with you, and it is indeed my privilege to introduce our chief guest tonight. Dr. Tharoor, thank you for so graciously acceding our request to be our chief guest. And I know that you've got a really busy schedule. You're here for 2 hours. You've flown in from Delhi and you're flying back. And you're probably going to be spending more time in the air than on the ground. But so we'll remain eternally grateful to you. Many of us in this audience have read about you, talked about you, wanted to meet with you, certainly enjoyed your humor, perhaps even twittered with you, but not yet had the opportunity to meet with you. At least I don't think so in this audience. I have little doubt that as many people who have come here to applaud Aditya have also come here to hear you, our new rising star of Indian politics. It is undeniably our privilege. I'm going to move these. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tharoor is not unfamiliar to any of us. In his short time on the Indian political scene, he has established his distinctive style that is quite unique in this country. and naturally so, as he spent the better part of his career outside India, more notably in the US, where Facebook and Twitter are common, or as common probably, as are idli and dosa to some of his peers in the Lok Sabha. Little wonder then that his superb American-style campaign in the last general election, extensively employing new modern technology to win over the minds and hearts of the people of, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala, resulted in a landslide victory, winning as he did by a margin of over 100,000 votes, the biggest victory by any candidate in that constituency for over 30 years. And this in spite of the fact that he grew up not in Kerala, but in Kolkata. In fact, he has a close connection to journalism, as his father was for many years with the Statesman. Before becoming a Member of Parliament in India and our Minister of State for External Affairs, Dr. Tharoor spent the greater part of his career with the United Nations, as most of you know, and served this exceptional organization with fine distinction, rising as he did through the ranks to the high-ranking position of Under-Secretary General in a mere 23 years. Yes, his illustrious career at the UN deserves more than just a sheer mention. He commenced his career at the UN in 1978, the same year, I may add, that Business India was launched, and joined the UN Singapore office, serving as UN High Commissioner for Refugees, a position he held during the Vietnamese boat people crisis. 11 years later, he moved to the United Nations headquarters in New York as a senior official, and until 1996, he was responsible for peacekeeping operations in the former Yugoslavia during the time of the Yugoslav civil wars. Thereafter, he was executive assistant to UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, and then was promoted all the way up to the position of Under Secretary General for Communications and Public Information. He played a key role at the UN in some of the major events of his time. He established a reputation at the Department of Public Information as a reformer and as one of the UN's most articulate voice for the principles of the United Nations Charter, as also the work of multilateralism in an increasingly unipolar world. He was responsible for a number of initiatives, including authoring an annual list of 10 underreported stories the world ought to know about. He's an extremely popular amongst his colleagues, and I recently met an old colleague of his, Paula Rifolo, over dinner in New York a fortnight ago, and she was telling me that one of the high points of her career was to be assistant to Dr. Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor is a prolific writer and has authored several books which are markedly Indo-nostalgic. As I said earlier, journalism is in Shashi Tharoor's blood. He has written many a column and op-ed piece for prominent publications such as the Times of India, the Hindu, the International Herald Tribune, Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times. I won't mention them anymore, but there were many more. I hope it won't be long before, Dr. Tharoor, you can be one of our columnists in Business India and you can add that to the list. Dr. Tharoor is passionate about cricket, is a theatre buff, and a successful actor in his school days, I believe. In fact, he played Anthony to Meera Nair's Cleopatra in a 1974 production of Anthony and Cleopatra. At St. Stephen's College in the early 1970s, he founded the Quiz Club, which is still in existence today. A common friend who knows him well tells me he's a super father. Both his sons, twins by the way, graduated from Yale University and are exceptional writers like Dad. Both write professionally for a living like their granddad, one for Time magazine, the other as the editor of Open Democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you, Mrs. Bilamoria, for that overly full and generous introduction. I have to say it's the sort of introduction that my late father would have been proud of, but only my mother would have believed. The truth is that you could tell as she went on that she had been looking me up on the internet. A terrifying prospect these days when you come to speak to new audiences. It could have been worse, I suppose. I know a person in New York who sort of does what Mrs. Billamoria does and looks up members of the family and what they're up to and disgraces them in the public eye. By one occasion he found he was going to introduce a speaker whose uncle had been electrocuted at Sing Sing prison for kidnapping and armed robbery or something equally horrible. But having taken the trouble to look it up, he felt he had to use it. So he said, our distinguished speaker had an uncle who occupied the chair of applied electricity in one of the nation's leading institutions. That's sort of the Mrs. Billamoria school of introductions, so please take her kind words with a pinch of salt. Mr. Aditya Puri, Businessman of the Year 2009. Mr. Vicky Oberoi, last year's winner. I think it's only in Bombay that you'd have a suited and booted business occasion where the basic principle seems to be borrowed from Miss World, where the previous year's winner hands the crown and the tiara on to the next one. But there you are. Mr. Ashok Advani, Mrs. Billamoria, distinguished guests, especially Mr. Deepak Parekh, who is the godfather of where we are today, and the Puri family. What a pleasure. I was saying to Mr. Puri that I'm sure that of all the tributes that made him blush, the two that must have made him happiest were from his wife and daughter. Wonderful to have you here. All the beautiful people of Bombay, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I hope that covers everybody. It really is a pleasure to be here at this splendid occasion and to celebrate the award of Business India's Businessman of the Year 2009 to Aditya Puri, Chairman of the HDFC Bank. It was intriguing to hear from the film we saw that he doesn't carry a mobile phone and still manages to get to leave for home at 5:30. Maybe there's a connection there. We'll have to figure out. I'll come back to mobile phones later, but I wonder if they might be taking up more of our time than for those who can get away at 5:30. Now, as has already been pointed out, it's appropriate that we are honoring a distinguished banker at a time when we're looking forward to a new budget and looking back with satisfaction at how we have coped with the current global economic crisis. In the last fiscal year, as you know, the previous one, India's gross domestic product grew around 6% in every quarter, or what was otherwise described by economists as the most difficult 12 months in the world's recent history. In our most recent quarter, the figure was 7.9%. And as against this, most countries in the world suffered negative growth rates in at least one quarter in the last 2 years. And many reasons have been attributed for this success. Certainly, that's why we're honoring a banker, I'm sure, because our banks and financial institutions manage not to be tempted by the toxic mortgage-supported securities and the fancy derivatives and credit default swaps that ruin so many Western financial institutions. Second, our merchandise exports did register declines of about 30%. Our services exports continue to do well. Third, remittances from our overseas Indian community remained robust, reaching $46.4 billion in 2008-09, the bulk of which came from hard-working, blue-collar Indian expatriates in the Gulf. And fourth and finally, some 80% of our GDP, maybe slightly less now, doesn't normally come from external trade, but from Indians producing goods and services for other Indians in India. And besides these developments, as the government minister, let me say, our financial authorities have also pursued sensible policies, providing for lower interest rates, expanded credit, lower excise duties, all of which have served to boost economic activity. So I suspect there is not much anxiety here this evening, or for that matter outside this lovely location. One indication of the extent to which the world has come to appreciate our economy is that when the financial crisis began in September 2008, foreign investors immediately withdrew $12 billion from our stock markets. But they are now coming flooding back into our exchanges. $27.3 billion in 2008-09, in spite of the global financial crisis, and FDI continuing this year, reaching a peak rate of $1 billion per week in the course of May 2009. Now, much of the conventional analyses of India's stature in the world relies on this kind of positive news. The forecasts still are that in GDP terms, India will be the world's fifth largest economy by 2020 after the US, China, Japan and a united Europe. And if you don't count Europe as one, we should be ahead of them. We could move up to third place within a decade thereafter. So in the midst of the justifiably celebratory atmosphere around all of that, I thought it might be healthy to offer a bit of perspective. You see, India's global economic stature is actually quite a change, since in fact, as Geeta Gopalakrishnan reminded us in her initial remarks, there was a time not so long ago when businessmen were supposed to be ashamed of their profits. For more than 4 decades, including about the time that this magazine came into existence, India suffered from what we might call the economics of nationalism, which equated political independence with economic self-sufficiency, and so largely isolated India from the world economy. Here in a gathering of businessmen, most people axiomatically associate capitalism with freedom. But it would be unwise to forget that the great leaders of Indian nationalism associated capitalism with slavery. Why? Because the British East India Company had come to trade and stayed on to rule. So our nationalist leaders were suspicious of every foreigner with a briefcase, seeing him as the thin end of a neo-imperial wedge. And instead of integrating India into the global capitalist system, as a few post-colonial countries like Singapore so effectively were to do, our leaders were convinced that the political independence they had fought for so long and so hard could only be guaranteed through economic independence. So self-reliance became the slogan, the protectionist barriers went up, the license permit quota Raj was born, and India spent, 45 years perhaps one might argue that, with bureaucrats rather than businessmen on the commanding heights of the economy, spending a good part anyway of those first 4.5 decades in subsidizing unproductivity, regulating stagnation, and trying to distribute poverty. Which only goes to show that one of the lessons you learn from history is that history can sometimes teach you the wrong lessons. Well, it took a financial crisis in 1991 that all of you here know about to prompt our country to change course, with Dr. Manmohan Singh memorably invoking Victor Hugo in his budget speech of 1991 to say, "There is no power on earth that can stop an idea whose time has come." That idea was the unshackling of the Indian economy, which has made possible evenings like this one. Economic reforms are here to stay, even though they are pursued with the understandable hesitancy of democratic governments looking constantly over their electoral shoulders. Today, economic reforms sometimes remind me of the old saw I heard as a student about Indian diplomacy. It used to be said that Indian diplomacy was like the lovemaking of an elephant. It was conducted at a very high level, accompanied by much bellowing, and the results were not known for 2 years. Now, this is not true anymore, I'm happy to say, about Indian diplomacy, but it might still be true of some Indian economic reforms which are promulgated from on high with much fanfare and then take an age to be implemented because of all the vested interests and obstacles that have to be overcome. But progress is being made, and the numbers demonstrate clearly that economic liberalization in a globalizing world has changed India irreversibly. Now, it's just as well that I invoked the elephant, since I wrote a book in 2007 called The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone. It's a book about the transformation of India, and 2/3 of the title is perhaps self-explanatory. I begin the book with a Panchatantra-type fable about India as a lumbering, slumbering, ponderous elephant, mired in its own dust and mud, covered in flies, slow to move, slow to change, which in recent years, thanks to institutions like HDFC and the HDFC Bank, appears to be acquiring the stripes of an agile, lithe and sinewy tiger. But then where does the cell phone come in, you might well ask? Well, with all due respect to our honoree today who doesn't carry one, the cell phone is the instrument that to me most epitomizes this change in India. See, I grew up in an India in which telephones were both rare and virtually useless. And when I left India from Calcutta in 1975 to go to the US for graduate studies, we had perhaps 600 million citizens of our country and just 2 million landline telephones. Having a telephone was a rare privilege. If you weren't an important government official or a doctor or a journalist, you might languish in a long waiting list and never receive a phone. In fact, it was so rare that members of parliament had, amongst their privileges, the right to allocate 15 telephone connections to whomever they deemed worthy. But if you did have a phone, it wasn't necessarily a blessing. I spent my high school years in Calcutta, and I remember a phone sitting there in the foyer, and every day you'd pick it up, hoping you might hear a dial tone. More often than not, you didn't. If you got a dial tone and dialed a number, the word that you heard more often than hello was wrong number. Sometimes you were connected to somebody else's ongoing conversation. There was even a technical term for it. It was called a cross connection. These were connections that made us very cross. Now, if you wanted to call another city, let's say you want to call Bombay from Calcutta, well, you had to book a trunk call and sit by the phone all day waiting for it to come through. Or if you really wanted to do it quickly, you could pay 8 times the going rate for something called a lightning call. But in those days, even lightning struck slowly in our country, so it took about half an hour for a lightning call to come through before you could speak to your friends in Bombay. Look, as late as 1984, when this magazine was already well in existence, a member of parliament rose to protest this woeful, appalling performance by a public sector monopoly, and our then communications minister replied in a lordly manner that in a developing country, telephones are a luxury, not a right, that the government had no obligation to provide better service, and that if the honourable member was not satisfied with his telephone, could he please return it, since there was an 8-year-long waiting list for this inadequate instrument. Now, fast forward to today. When I finished writing the book I was telling you about, I was able to report in it that in April 2007, India had just set a new world record by selling 7 million cell phones that month, which was more telephone connections than any country had ever established in 1 month in the history of telecommunications. Well, the book went off to the press, got printed and bound, and arrived in all good bookstores, and that figure was already out of date. Because in each of the last 3 months of 2007, India broke its own world record, and in December that year, when my book hit the stands, we sold 8.3 million cell phones in our country. The pattern continued into 2008, when the 10 million barrier was breached. In 2009, 15 million became the new frontier. It will be crossed each month this year. So today, in 1 month, India sells more, 2.5 times more telephones than the entire country possessed 2 decades ago. We have overtaken the United States to be the world's second largest telephone market. But most important of all is the issue of who carries these cell phones in today's India. See, most of you here, of course, are bound to be chauffeur-driven everywhere, and I'm sure your driver carries a cell phone, right? And that it's his own. If you visit a friend in a Delhi suburb, I'm not sure you have this phenomenon in the crowded streets of Mumbai, but Delhi suburb, you will notice on the side streets are istriwalas, right? There's a chap with a wooden cart that looks like it was designed in the 17th century, with a coal-fired steam iron that looks like it was invented in the 18th century, and he will be carrying a 21st century cell phone. Because, of course, in most plans, incoming calls are free, and it costs him nothing to get calls from the neighborhood telling him which house to come to pick up the clothes that he needs to iron. Recently, I visited the country farm of a friend of mine in Kerala. This is about 20 kilometers away from any place Mrs. Billamoria can't pronounce, any place that you might consider urban, Thiruvananthapuram. So it was a hot day, and he said, hey, would you like some fresh coconut water, nariyal pani, which, as you all know, is the most refreshing and nutritious thing you can drink on a hot day. So I said, sure. And he whipped out his mobile phone, dialed a number, and a voice said, I'm up here. And right on top of the nearest coconut tree, with his lungi tied around his knees, a hatchet in one hand and a cell phone in the other, was a local toddy tapper, who proceeded to bring down the coconuts for us to drink. Now, this is an absolutely true story, and what you're seeing in Kerala, fishermen are taking their cell phones out to sea to call the market towns on the coast on their way back to find out which town offers them the best price for the particular fish they've caught. Farmers who used to have to walk after the harvest, what they would have to do is either to walk or to send an able-bodied relative, perhaps an 8-year-old boy, all the way in the hot sun to the nearest market town to find out if the market was open, whether his produce could be sold, what the price would be for it. Then the poor kid would be trudging back the other sort of 8 or 10 kilometers. Then they'd load the cart. Then they'd head off to the market. Half a day's back-breaking labor for millennia, which is now saved by 1 2-minute phone call. So the chairman of HDFC Bank doesn't need to carry a mobile phone, but the cell phone has now empowered the Indian underclass in ways in which 45 years of talk about socialism had perhaps never been able to do. And yet there's still a long way to go. It's become a cliche to speak of India as a land of paradoxes. The old joke about our country is that whatever you say about India, the opposite is also true. We like to think of ourselves as an ancient civilization, but we're also a young republic. Our IT experts stride confidently into the 21st century, but much of our population seems to live in each of the other 20 centuries. Quite often, of course, the opposites coexist quite cheerfully. The Kumbh Mela is going on these days, but one of my favorite images of India is from the previous Kumbh Mela, which was a photograph that I received on the internet of a naked sadhu, straight out of central casting, okay? Matted hair, ash-smeared forehead, scraggly beard, Rudraksha mala around his neck. For all the world, a picture of timeless otherworldliness. And in this photograph, this naked sadhu was chatting away into a cell phone. I even suggested it to my publishers as the perfect cover image, but they assured me it is a cliche in itself. And yet, cliches are cliches because they are true. And the paradoxes of India, a country in which a naked sadhu can chat on a cell phone, say something painfully real about our society, a place where bullock carts are still an indispensable mode of transportation for millions, but as rocket and satellite programs are amongst the most advanced on Earth. And these paradoxes go well beyond the nature of our entry into the 21st century. Our teeming cities overflow, while 2 out of 3 Indians still scratch a living from the soil. We've been recognized for all practical purposes as a leading nuclear power, but 600 million Indians still have no access to electricity, and there are daily power cuts even in our nation's capital. Ours is a culture which elevated non-violence to an effective moral principle, but whose freedom was born in blood and whose independence still soaks in it. We're the world's leading manufacturers of generic medication for illnesses like AIDS, but we have 3 million of our own citizens without access to AIDS medication, another 2 million with TB, and tens of millions who have no health center or clinic within 10 kilometers walk of their places of residence. Bollywood makes 4 times as many movies as Hollywood, but 15 million Indians cannot see them because they are blind, often for entirely preventable reasons. India holds the world record for the number of cell phones sold, but we also hold the world record for the number of farmers' suicides. We have more billionaires in the top 10 of the prestigious Forbes magazine list every year than any other nationality. But we also have 260 million people living below the poverty line. And it's not the World Bank's poverty line of $1.25 a day or 75 rupees, but the Indian poverty line, which is calculated differently in urban and rural areas, and in rural India is 360 rupees a month, or 12 rupees, 30 cents a day. In other words, a poverty line that's been drawn just this side of the funeral pyre. We've trained world-class scientists and engineers, but 400 million of our compatriots are illiterate. And we also have more children who've not seen the inside of a school than any country in the world does. We have a great demographic advantage in that 540 million young people in our country are under the age of 25, which means we should have a dynamic, youthful, and productive workforce for the next 40 years, when the rest of the world, including China, is aging. But we also have 60 million child laborers, and 72% of the children in our government schools drop out by the 8th standard. We celebrate India's IT triumphs, but information technology has employed a grand total of what? 1, 2, 3 million people in the last 5 years, while 10 million are entering the workforce each year, and we don't have enough jobs for them. Many of our urban youth, your children, those of you in the audience today, who have children, they say rightly with confidence that their future will be better than their parents' past. But there are others who have a different view of the future, and there are Maoist insurgencies, as you know, violently disturbing the peace in 165 of our 602 districts, and these are largely made up of unemployed young men. So yes, we are a land of paradoxes, and amongst those paradoxes is that so many of us speak about India even as a great power of the 21st century, when we are not yet able to feed, educate, and employ all our people. And yet, as this evening demonstrates, and as the positives we're here to celebrate and that I've already alluded to reveal, India is more than the sum of its contradictions. It may still be a country rife with poverty and pestilence, but it nonetheless moved a Mughal emperor to declaim, if on earth there be paradise of bliss, it is this, it is this, it is this. We just have a lot more to do before it can be anything like paradise for the vast majority of our fellow citizens. And that is why I think in celebrating the successes of business, we must also call upon business to look beyond the profit margin, to look to the social purposes of business. The references to microcredit and microfinancing in HDFC Bank's work were most welcome and most important. If there ever were a case for people like yourselves, educated, risk-taking professionals, to get involved in politics and in the substance of public policy, this is undoubtedly it. The people here have the skill, the talent, and the wealth to make a difference in our society, to create an India of which we can all be proud. That is the challenge before all of us. I'm confident you would all rise to it. Congratulations again to Ms. Puri. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The business community in Mumbai is honored to have had the opportunity to draw inspiration from your address. It is an absolute privilege for all our guests to gain strength from your energy, your vision, your conviction. Can I take the liberty of saying your tweetness? If the word Aditya means the sun, Shashi means the moon. With you steering our nation ahead, we are all gung-ho about a shining future for India. We know our external affairs has the steer of safe and proven hands, and wish you a glorious future on the national political front. Business India would like to offer you a small token of our appreciation. May I call upon Mr. Anis Fazalboy, Group Executive Director, S. Kumar's Nationwide, to hand over a small memento to our chief guest. S. Kumars, as you know, own the luxury brand Reed & Taylor. The company is our presenting sponsor for the event. S. Kumars is amongst India's leading textile and apparel brand. Mr. Advani, Mr. Oberoi, and Mrs. Bilamoria, could I please now ask you to escort the Honorable Minister and Mr. Puri to the front of the stage, and a small shairi to follow before the fanfare and all the excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've been waiting for, and a small shairi for those who are not very conversant with Urdu or know the nuances. All it means is, There are some people who chase and chase milestones to reach their destination, and there are some to whom destination just beckons. कुछ ऐसे हैं जिनसे मंजिल हर वक्त गुरेजान रहती है. कुछ ऐसे हैं जिनसे मंजिल हर वक्त गुरेजान रहती है. कुछ ऐसे हैं जिनको हरदम मंजिल के इशारे होते हैं. Yet another manzil, yet another milestone beckons a fine human being and an outstanding leader. Could we all have some wah-wahs, please? Business India is immensely proud to announce Mr. Aditya Puri as the Businessman of the Year 2009. Before we invite Aditya Puri on stage for his acceptance address, I would like to tell you a small anecdote about him that has not been covered anywhere, not even in Business India. A fisherman got an HDFC bank loan to start a retail outlet. Aditya saw his board which said, "Fresh fish sold here." So Aditya looked up and said, "Here? It's obvious it's here. Where else could it be?" So the fisherman took off the words "here," and the board read, "Fresh fish sold." Aditya looked up again and said, "Sold? You're a salesman, you're in the business of selling, you're not buying anything." So the fisherman nodded and said, "Perhaps you're right," and off went the word "sold." So the board read a nice and neat "fresh fish." So Aditya looks up again and said, "Well, fresh? Surely you don't intend communicating that you're selling stale fish." So the fisherman removed the words "fresh," and now it just read "fish." And Aditya looked up and said, "Why do you even need to say that? You can smell it miles away." That's Aditya Puri for you. I was going to pass off this anecdote as real, but actually it's inspired by a Reader's Digest anecdote, and I heard Dr. Tharoor was associated with the magazine, so I had to confess. But anyway, he is a man of few words, is Aditya Puri, but a man of big action. So ladies and gentlemen, over to Aditya Puri. We hope on this special occasion he will say more than just a few words.
Honorable Minister, Shri Ashok Advani, Shri Oberoi, Firoza Bilamoria, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As usual, I humbly, and that's the fact, accept this award on behalf of all my colleagues at HDFC Bank. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Business India, the members of the jury, lots of my friends and colleagues who've supported me over the years, and a lot of them are here today. But most of all, I'd like to thank my wife. Sorry. For being a pillar of support and strength. I'd also like to thank my daughter. Hopefully she may think now that I can do something right. The world today has been buffeted by a financial crisis and an economic recession, which is probably the worst in living memory. India, as the minister said, is fortunate because we have the blessings of God with us. In terms of the financial tsunami passed us by, and so at worst, we suffered an economic slowdown. Consequently, the West has avoided a crisis, but is still to solve its problems in terms of over-leverage of the individual, over-leveraging of the government, and an asset bubble, which will take some time. India, on the other hand, with its robust financial system and various stimuli, fiscal and monetary, is well on its way to solving its problems, as has been demonstrated by the growth rate of 7% plus this year and 8% thereafter. Like Mr. Tharoor, I'm very positive about India, and I'm sure so are all of you. The reasons have been oft repeated. 60% of our GDP is domestic. We have a low dependence on exports. We have a demographic dividend coming our way, but we should be careful. If we don't manage health and education, it'll become a nightmare. We have a functioning banking system. We have a savings rate of 36% and an investment demand of 38%. So I'd venture to suggest a lot of this noise about foreign capital is more an inefficiency in our financial intermediation than an actual shortage of capital. I do believe that we will achieve an 8% growth rate even with all our problems and shortcomings. But it would be foolhardy not to aim for 10% because we have poverty and we must get rid of it in the shortest possible time. Fortunately or unfortunately, we all know about our problems to get that additional 2%. But somehow the solution awaits us. Given the fact that we are near the budget, let's give it a shot one more time with feeling. Infrastructure, we need an upgrade, there's no doubt about it. I do believe, as the Minister said as well, that we're on the right track. The Minister, Mr. Nath of Highways and Roads, has actually said he'll take the amount of new roads built from 2 to 20. That should go a long way in joining what is called politically India and Bharat, which should bring it the attendant prosperity. We also have a lot more power coming on stream, and we have plans for the rest. But if only we can execute, and I hope we can execute it right this time. We need a revamp of our subsidy mechanism. I'll cover microfinance later. It's always puzzled me where all these subsidies and the upliftment of the poor, the amount of money we spend, we could have changed the bloody world by now. So obviously we need a revamp from generalized to specific subsidies, and we need a change in the distribution system. Maybe they need to involve the private sector, because at least then we will have less leakage. We have a demographic dividend that's coming up, but as I said, if you don't want it to be a nightmare, I think the others have alluded to it, you need to revamp your education and health system. As far as education is concerned, we still produce the babus, but there are no jobs for them. We need to take into account the changed circumstances, and I do suggest that we have a government guaranteed education loan scheme so that the needy are provided, needy but deserving, are provided education. I would like you to know that the US has such a scheme for education, and 80% of educational loans are guaranteed by the government. I'm not running away from the responsibility of the banks, except if you want scale, then you must assist the banks. We have energy. We are a net energy deficient country, and I'm amazed at the lack of debate, because this is one thing that can possibly derail India's bright prospects, the price of energy. We better have a policy very clearly defined, which in a short period of time leads to self-sufficiency. And if you talk to a lot of the other Indians working in multinationals, a lot more efficiency in our extraction. And as we said about the elephants, our agriculture policy reflects that. We have a committee, then we have another committee, we have another committee, but the fact of the matter is 60% plus of our population lives in farm-related areas, and their lot is dismal. But it's not beyond hope, because we have, if it was a major corporation and they gave me a stock option like Deepak did, I would take it straight away. I think we can turn it around, because our yield is less than most developing countries. Our wastage is criminal. The wastage, because of a lack of a food chain on food and vegetables, is approximately 80,000 crores. What is lost in storage is 30 million tons. 15 paisa out of a public distribution system reaches the actual beneficiary. Last but not the least, I think all of us realize you can't have two Indias. There's no point shouting about the Naxalites, etc. People must have a full stomach. So we must link Bharat and India and have appropriate schemes. Now I come to the financial sector, which seems to hog the headlines. Maybe our journalists are more financial people than anything else. I wish they could expand the debate. The financial sector reflects the real economy, and that's how the structure should be. India, as was said before, is a paradox. We are a rich-poor country. This complicates the field for the financial sector as well, because we need characteristics of a developed economy as well as a developing economy. And in the absence of debt and equity markets, the banks are being asked to perform an impossible task of being the debt providers for the market, the equity market, their normal job as a bank, and also government development. This is not going to go on. The banking system is doing a good job of meeting the purpose that it was set up for, providing loans, working capital to the individuals, to the small businessmen, to the farmers. We do not need much tinkering, and so there's so much talk about financial sector reform. I wish they talked about agriculture and energy reform instead. At best, you can examine the preemption of credit in terms of SLR and CRR, but because that could be made available to other protective sectors. Microfinance is a reform we should look at, or microfinance related schemes which ensure that you can create viability for the people at the bottom of the pyramid. I find it strange when you say, if somebody gave me 10 crores, I wouldn't know how to set up a business. The fact of the matter is you need to provide an enabling environment for this poor educated soul so that he is financially viable. Microfinance is one of them. There should be other areas which should be promoted. Our equity markets are good. We need some depth. Then we'll eliminate the volatility in the financial system. I'm just trying to take off from where the minister left off, that we have a lot of opportunity, and it's not as difficult as we would make it seem. We have a problem with the debt market because we need major funding for infrastructure, about $500 billion, and the debt market needs development. That again is not so difficult. For that we need liquid and efficient sovereign bond market with an arbitrage-free yield curve. In simplistic terms, let the government borrow in the market so that there's market available and you can have a yield curve. We need a spot liquid market for corporate bonds, which means that institutional investors like provident funds, PFs, etc., must be allowed to participate in the market. We need credit default swaps because these investors, and rightly so, are holding my hard-earned money, and I don't want to be in the position of the Americans with my pension gone while I'm still dreaming. So we need something to bridge the gap between the AAA securities that these people need and what the new projects will have. And probably banks can play a part there. And we need derivatives. Not all derivatives are bad. So I won't take too much more of your time because you will be getting restless, but I can't let this go without saying something about HDFC and what we intend to do about the bottom of the pyramid. HDFC Bank is perfectly positioned to take part in the 8% growth of Shining India, in the developments of the financial markets, and the new markets that will develop with the bridging of Bharat and India. We today have a capital adequacy of approximately 18%, which is among the best in the world. We have a margin of 4%, which is definitely not because we charge high rates, it's because we are efficient and have a lower cost of deposits. We have a credit portfolio that's not under strain, and we are a market leader in most of our products. So we will participate. If the economy grows at 8%, there's a credit multiplier of 3. The financial system will grow at 24%. We normally gain market share and will grow faster than that. But HDFC Bank, which I define as our board of directors, myself, and my colleagues, are absolutely passionate about making sure that we play our part in giving our dues to society. Our board has passed a resolution which over the next 5 years commits to making 10 million people, not people, 10 million families at the bottom of the pyramid financially viable. I know I'm keeping you from dinner, but we're so passionate about this that I have to take 2 minutes of your time. The way we plan to achieve this is one, through microfinance. We firmly believe that in order to take away poverty, it's not enough to open an account or just give them a loan. You must create financial viability by providing an enabling infrastructure covering manufacturing, product, marketing, so that at the end, even after paying your interest rate, he's able to meet his living expenses. We have set up an extensive infrastructure along the length and breadth of this country and have already made 2 million families at the bottom of the pyramid financially viable. It is our aim, and I don't carry a cell phone, but I think I use it. And you sound like my daughter, because the last time I got a technology award, she said, "Pop, it can't be you. You don't even have a cell phone." But I know how to use it, Shashi. So we are looking at taking services to the interior in joint partnership with telecom companies, extending it with business correspondents as well as cooperative banks. Because which we have done, as you study and go into the interior, even a Narega payment, he loses 1 day's wage, he spends 25 rupees to go and come back, and it's just not fair. So you have to take banking to him. We want to bring down the cost of mutual funds, microfinance down from 30 to 20%. And as we get scaled towards 10 million, we think we will not only be profitable, but we would have made our contribution to society. We want to substitute the money lender. It's important here that we understand that when I give you money, you would owe it back to me. And it's for the politicians and everybody to understand that this should not be a matter of politics. If you don't ensure that I get my money back, then the banks will lend only to the middle and upper middle class. And the curse of the money lender that India is afflicted with will remain here forever. So I strongly recommend that we don't use strong arm tactics, but please do not create a culture where he does not return the money. But we will still do our part. We are taking to the interior products like loans against jewelry. McKinsey, for instance, estimated that the stock of jewelry in private hands today is equivalent to 50% of the stock of the fixed deposits. If I can get this into the system, that will probably add 2 percentage points to your GDP. We have taken our entire spectrum of loans right into the interior, covering crop loans, business banking, two-wheelers, and everything else. We also must understand that even though for priority sector it's only agriculture loans, even though 20% of our GDP is agriculture, only 10% is crop. The rest are the ancillary activities for which we've set up a small business banking unit where with the security will shop, because I do want my money back, he's able to take a loan from us and expand substantially. We're also trying to take jobs into the rural areas. So we have now created in Nellore and Tirupati a rural BPO employing 1,000 people, because if it has to come away from the rural area, he can't send money back home. This is an area that we're again very happy with. So we do plan to pay our debt to society. We also want to make sure we participate in the development of India. We at HDFC Bank and myself are very confident that we will, with the right policies, achieve our rightful place in the world firmament. Thank you for your patience. Let me not keep you away from dinner. God bless and have a happy and prosperous New Year. Thank you.
Mr. Puri, all your passion and commitment and dedication came through in that truly inspiring acceptance speech. It's a common belief that men who really want to make it big have to sacrifice time with the family. That's proved wrong with Aditya. He has had all the time in the world for his family. He has indeed proved that both family and business can indeed come first. It's an old cliche to say that behind every successful man is a woman. But Dr. Tharoor just observed a while ago that cliches are cliches, but they are true. So this is true. Behind the success of Aditya is this wonderful, large smile of Smiley. And truly, Smiley, you and the children have an amazing part to play in this wonderful achievement. Aditya, welcome to the family of Business India, Businessman of the Year, a well-deserved place in the Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, I just will breeze through some thanks which are deserving. We thank you for being, firstly, such a wonderful audience and sharing in our celebration tonight as we honor Mr. Aditya Puri. On behalf of Business India, may I take the opportunity to thank all of those who made this evening possible. Mr. Nitin Kasliwal, Mrs. Jyoti Kasliwal, and the entire team at S. Kumar's Nationwide, our presenting sponsors, who become an integral part of the ceremony. Business India is indeed to have you as partners at this event. Our co-sponsors, Mr. Venugopal Doot, the Doot family, and the Videocon team. You have partnered us from the very first event, and you are now vital to the show. Thank you indeed. This year, we're also happy to have with us a co-sponsor, a new co-sponsor, Jet Airways. Our many thanks indeed. We look forward to Jet Airways being with us every year henceforth. Our event sponsors, Mr. Raj Naik of NDTV Media Limited, many, many thanks. I'm happy to announce the ceremony will be telecast on NDTV Profit on Saturday 6th March at 17:30 hours and Sunday 7th March at 12:30 hours. Shubhas, an absolute thank you, Mr. Bikram Basu and Penrod Rickard team. We are sure you will lift our spirits even further. Grover Vineyards and Mr. Kanwar Grover and Kapil Grover, you've been with us since the start, and we're indeed grateful for your continuous support to your fine wines. Our thanks to Pesho Wadia of Wadia Graphics and Vivek Shah of the cutting crew. Thank you, Fountainhead, Kadam Audio Visual, and Imran for your humongous behind-the-scenes effort. Thanks to Joss for the dinner service. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Advani has a little fear, which he expressed a while ago. It was just mentioned by Feroza that Dr. Tharoor once starred in a Meera Nair production. And of course, for all those who can see Aditya, he looks pretty close to a Bollywood star. And Mr. Advani is a bit worried there'll be a huge rush to the podium, so he's requested that you stay in your seats and the guests will come down and mingle with you shortly. The evening is far from over, the night is young, and Shivas, Absolute and Grover expect many a toast to be raised through the night. Joss has laid out an incredible menu, and Reese D'Souza on the saxophone and Ian on the guitar are all set to play some wonderful melodies. Aditya and Smiley, when the rumba rhythm starts to play, sway away. Enjoy, everyone in the audience, do let your hair down and enjoy yourselves. And on behalf of the entire Business India team, and until next year, thank you, good night, and Jai Ho, India.
Many thanks to Geeta too, so a round of applause for her.